Welcome, game dev adventurers, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour. Today we're talking with Luke Piazza about nailing the design interview.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
Everybody get ready, because first of all, by the way, Yo Dog in the audience right there is the exact guy who made that little musical quip. Maybe hire him. And we're getting more quips. We're going to have more sound effects soon. All right. Welcome, everybody, to our live magical podcast. On this show, we give game developers the chance to hear stories of breaking in from real industry experts, as well as directly ask them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. This is a live recording that we host every week in our Discord at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. So feel free to come and join us. There are links to join the Discord down below. It's a wonderful place to be. As always, I am your host. I am Willem Delventhal, the headmaster of the Indie Game Academy and the self-proclaimed Wizard of Joy. I'm the Purple Wizard of Games. You may have seen me. I love me some indie gamers. Today, we're being joined by Luke Piazza. Luke is an associate system designer over at Five Nights at Freddy's, which is so cool. We're definitely going to talk about that. And we are talking about nailing the design interview. Luke, what are you having for lunch today?
Leftover fried rice. My wife makes killer fried rice, and she makes a lot of it. So we just have stacks and stacks in the fridge. Put it in the microwave, heat it up. Extra soy sauce, can't go wrong, nice. Honestly.
Delicious. I think that's it's uncommon for people to tell me actual food. So I'm glad that you're...
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I am fast metabolism. I work out a lot. I'm skin and bones right now. I need to bulk up.
That's good. I'm glad you're getting the
calories.
Right.
Yeah.
First tip from Luke Piazza: make sure you carbo load before your interviews.
Yes. Exactly. You better show up to an interview with me with a full plate of eggs.
Just eat the whole time.
Yes. I like your attitude.
I love it. All right. I'll warn everybody, this episode and next episode, I am home visiting family, which has been awesome, but you might hear some crying babies in the background. Please forgive us if that does happen. It's time for us to begin. So, Luke, I'm really excited to talk about nailing the design interview. At the Indie Game Academy, I would say our biggest subset of students is designers, people who want to work in game design in general, and of course, one of the niches like systems design, which is so cool. So I would love to talk about that with you a little bit, but I love the fact that we're talking specifically about interviewing as a designer, because we don't typically get that sort of nuanced or specific. Before we get there, though, we always have to start with the fateful question. Luke, can you please tell us your origin story? How did you get to where you are today, and what do you do?
Sure thing, yes, to give the lore back. The lore dump. So I started game development, I think, roughly when I was 15 or 16. I was very fortunate where my parents sent me to a tech summer camp. And just for some background information, I sucked at school. I was always bad at it. I especially math and chemistry. I hated it because I was really bad at it. So I would always look at the clock, and I just remember distinctly when I went to this summer camp, and I was like, oh great, I gotta go to the summer camp. I gotta look at a clock, the entire time. But I was actually taught game design at the summer camp. I worked in Unity and stuff like that. And it was the very first time that I was sitting down working on a project with other people. And I was like, oh, the bell rang. I don't want this to end. I want to keep working on this. I didn't look at the clock once. And I think it was in that exact moment of oh, cool. I know what I want to do. So I was very lucky in that aspect of I found pretty early on what I like to do and what I think I could be good at. Because again, it was something school, I sucked in every single thing out there. Even in PE, I was tripping over myself 24/7. So to find something that I felt I had some sort of inherent skill with, and that I was able to kind of work towards, it was really inspiring for me. And so after that, I was also again very lucky that my high school offered a game design class, the first of its kind ever. And this was back in 2015, maybe even earlier than that. So it was probably one of the first that I've ever heard from people that I've ever talked to of in school game design. So it was great, and I even got to work with my teacher a little bit because I had the background in going to the summer camp. of like creating the curriculum and whatnot. So it was just so much fun. Like I spent all my days in the computer lab, like working on Unity projects. So I did that like all throughout the rest of my time at high school. That was like my junior senior year. And then I went to school at Bradley University. Connor Wolf, who was the speaker last week, also he was actually my roommate for many years. So really really funny. So I'm glad you had him on because he's great.
Yeah.
But we both went to study game design there. And then I actually ended up teaching at the summer camp. Connor and I both taught at the same summer camp where I learned my game design skills and I got to actually teach them to other people. And I just really enjoyed that as well. So like my summer job was essentially teaching games. School was making games. It was just kind of something that ever since, again, like I started, it was something I would always want to do. And I've been very blessed to be able to do it, as long as I have been. As roughly when I graduated was when I got my first job where I'm at right now. This was actually a week or two before I graduated. I was given an offer at my company where I'm at, Illumix, which to work specifically on the Five Nights at Freddy's series, specifically on the special delivery title. I still remember I actually got reached out to on LinkedIn by I think it was like a headhunter, actually, weirdly enough, for our company that was like, hey, do you want to be a game designer on... I worked on the AR games. I see somebody's comment. They know. So that's super cool. Not everyone knows about that title. It's very obscure, but I really enjoyed working on it. And but yeah, I got reached out and they basically said, do you want to work on Five Nights at Freddy's? And I was like, yes, please. And so I got to know the hiring manager, and then we did our first interview. I got through, I'll talk about this more during the design interview stuff, but I got the offer again like a week before I graduated college. They actually wanted me to start before graduation, but I was like, I need to finish school first. So again, I was very lucky. This was roughly around like 2021. And I've just been kind of working at our company since then for the past 3 years as a designer. The AR game has, since we've sunset the title, and now we're working on new things that I cannot talk about, but it is very exciting and fun. So
wow,
that's where I'm at. Yeah.
Must be nice to have a recruiter just like hit you up on LinkedIn. Hey,
I truly feel like the road was just paved for me. Yeah, like I really like, that's one of the things I really love is like doing things of like mentorship and giving back, because I feel like so much was given to me to begin with. So
yeah, I 100% agree with that. It's interesting that you found a summer camp with game design, because that's pretty unusual. It's starting to become more normal. But back in the day, I mean, I'm I guess a little bit further along than you, but still, when I was first learning, that was not a thing, or at least not a thing I was able to get. But I still consider myself very privileged, and I have that same sort of feeling where I really want to get back, specifically because I had an older brother who was in games. So he did the same thing for me. I didn't have a summer camp, but I did have an older brother to go to and be like, why the hell isn't my Flash ActionScript 3 code working? That was incredibly useful. So I love that. I want to ask one more question there, and then let's get to the topic. But
sure.
My curiosity, having a recruiter reach out on LinkedIn is quite unusual. So were you like working on building up the LinkedIn presence? Like, how do you think they found you there?
Yeah, so it was I've definitely, heard the advice of like the importance of networking. And I guess like something just kind of hit me of like, okay, well, it seems like LinkedIn is the right place to do that. And I actually had a competition with one of my roommates, not Connor at the time, of who could be the first to get 500 plus connections on LinkedIn.
Nice.
And so my strategy was like find people that like I would want there to be them essentially. And then I sent them a friend request. And then when I got that approved, I went through their connection list, and then I like hit connect on every single person on their connection list. Mm-hmm. And then I would pick someone from that list and then go in their list and then hit connection on every single one until LinkedIn was like, you're doing too much. And I would do that like every single week essentially, because I was like, I need all those connections. And I just so happened to be pretty lucky I made a connection with the recruiter or the headhunter that I guess saw my profile when I hit the connect button. They were like, oh, this seems like a pretty interesting profile. Because like I did put a lot of work and effort into making my LinkedIn pretty good, because I had a really good mentor at the time who's in the industry and was like, you need to spruce up your stuff. Here's how you can kind of do it to maximize your your portfolio and whatnot. And so I guess it really did pay off in dividends. That's for sure.
Wow, that's awesome. I mean, if nothing else, that's a great takeaway for everybody immediately. LinkedIn restricts how many personal messages you can send each month unless you pay them too much money. But they don't restrict, at least it is such a high number that you can pretty much just go for it. Connections, just straight up asking to connect with people. There's nothing to stop you. Haley pays them too much money in the comments, she says. There's nothing to stop you from just connecting and asking to connect with a bunch of really cool people. And when you do reach out to those people, I urge you, this is sort of standard advice I always give, find people who are just a couple of years ahead of you because they're the most likely to accept the connection and then to be able to give you some really pertinent advice. And then like go ham, like any company that excites you, any indies that seem interesting, look at other people's connections like Luke is saying, and you'll wind up having such a stronger presence online by doing so. And then the last part I think to take away from that lesson is spruce up the LinkedIn. LinkedIn really is the professional social network now. They've really thoroughly established themselves, and it's an essential tool in recruiting and hiring. So spend the effort to make your LinkedIn awesome. It's sort of like your first touch portfolio. It doesn't give as much advice as your real portfolio, but it's what people will look at, like sometimes even before your resume, let alone your portfolio. So make sure your LinkedIn's nice. All right, I think it's time. Let's talk about the topic for today: nailing the design interview. Where should we start, Luke?
I think just like maybe we could even start of like why I wanted to choose this topic.
Okay.
I was really inspired because my favorite GDC talk of all time, or my favorite speaker, he's given 2 talks specifically on this topic, actually. He was the design director on, I think, actually, in our LinkedIn roundtable, I touched upon this, but one of the design directors at Ubisoft gave a talk at his interview process for like vetting candidates and whatnot, like specifically like at Ubisoft, and like what he realized is like the design interview is a great way to actually figure out if you are a designer, because I think that's the biggest question and why it's so important. Is the design interview gives you a kind of like an experience you can't find anywhere else to really know if design is the field for you. Yes, Richard Carrillo is amazing. So please check out his link as GDC Talks. But yeah, the design interview gives you the opportunity to know if you have inherent design skills, and so I think that's something that people don't give as much thought into. It's just most people have the misconception that design is just you come up with cool ideas for games, and then you tell other people to make those cool ideas. And that's what a designer does.
That's all I do.
And yeah, right. It's just well, what if this? What if this? What if this? And you can give what ifs like till the cows come home. But I think like one of the important things that he talks about is the design interview gives you an opportunity to know if you're a problem solver, and I think that's probably one of the biggest things to look out for of if you're going into a design interview, is to come into the design interview with that mindset. Because I think like one of the core things specifically for a design interview is they'll ask you questions that gauge if you are a problem solver. So just to give like some examples, for my design interview, one of the questions I was asked by my lead designer was, okay, you have 1 minute to explain me a game with a deck of 52 cards, like a standard deck. And then that was like the whole basis of things, and I was a little caught off guard, and I was like, oh, okay, like I knew I gotta come up with something fast, and it has to be something that's easily explainable. And so I ended up going with war, like the simple game of war. You flip a card over. If one's higher than the other, then that person wins. And reflecting, actually, later asking my boss about that question, I was like, okay, what was the importance of this? And he said, basically, I wanted to know if you were able to communicate and have a good understanding of what is expected in this question, given your constraints. So it was 1 minute, and it was completely from scratch. So for example, some of the answers that other people gave was like poker. And poker is a game that is extremely complex. and you wouldn't really be able to explain it in 1 minute, and if you did, it would probably be rushed. And so he was kind of gauging of, do you have this mindset to understand, what I'm asking and to deliver it to other people, and show scoping, as mentioned by one of the comments. And then from there, after he asked essentially like what game to explain, he basically said, okay, well, what would you improve upon in the game? Like what is the faults in the game, or like, what would you do to make it, more interesting? And not to get too in the weeds of like what I ended up saying and whatnot, but the again, like the core takeaway from that was to figure out of, can you pinpoint where there's issues, like in an existing game or in a game that in like the design of a game you're working on, and where can you find out like what needs to be improved, and can you do it in a systems level where it doesn't break everything else. Like you have to be able to communicate. You can take everything into account. Like that's what really a designer's job is. There's a lot of ideas that can be thrown at you, as your day to day. Like that happens to me all the time. It's like, what if Freddy Fazbear hit you over the head with a guitar as an attack, or something crazy? Like what if Freddy could teleport? Like what if you could teleport? There's so many like what ifs, but you need to understand it in the larger context of the systems. And so again, like knowing if you're a problem solver, or getting into the mind frame of being a problem solver is probably one of the best ways to, I guess, like nail the design interview, or it's one of the first steps is know if you are actually a game designer by figuring out if you're a problem solver.
I love that. I had I think I maybe even mentioned this. So Luke and I were on a systems design roundtable semi-recently, which is how we met. It was super awesome. There's a recording of it actually on the IGA LinkedIn. You can go check out. But this reminds me of a moment that I had with a mentor, Tony Sharma, who's currently design director on what's it called? It's one of the really popular Duel Masters, the card game Duel Masters. And he had a super simple question that like doesn't sound like it would be as significant as it is to me, but he basically asked a 2-part question. The first part was, what is your favorite video game of all time, and defend it to me. So I had to tell him why. Mine is very famously, I'm very open about this, Chrono Trigger. I had to defend why it was awesome. And then after I spent some time defending why this game is so awesome, the best of all time, he then goes, okay, sweet, what would you improve about it? And that was such a really awesome 2-parter because, I got into the mental state of like defending why something is awesome, which I think basically any game player really can do. But then I had to get into the designer's mindset of pulling something apart and saying, okay, what are the weaknesses of something that I love so dearly? And that was one that like is super simple, but had a similar sort of epiphany moment for me, where I realized that this is what designers do.
Oh, for sure. Like every single design test I've ever taken, there's always some form of that question of like, what is your favorite game, or what is a game that you think is like successful, and then what would you improve about it? Because it's very easy to say like why a game is good, and especially if it is good, but then to be able to know like where its faults are and what can actually be done to improve upon it is a lot more difficult to find, because again, it's already good. It's a lot easier to say, here's the improvement for a really bad game. But if you can take a really good game and you have a clear understanding of why it's good and how to make it even better, is a really good sign of a good designer.
Yeah. Here's a question for you before I think we'll jump into community questions soon, so we've got some time for that. But here's a question for you. I would love for you to give us like a brief distinction. What is the difference between a high-level game designer and a systems designer?
A high-level game designer, I feel like, because the title of game designer is like very broad, it could, just mean like wearing a lot of hats of like, you could be doing like level design, you could be doing narrative design, and like there's a lot of elements to the game. But systems design is like specifically about how the core mechanics of games work within one another, and how do you balance all of them together to make it fun. Like one of my favorite things or again, like another big question that was asked in a design test was essentially like, in League of Legends, you're like the lead designer says Flash is too overpowered right now. We should potentially nerf it or take it out of the game. What's your response? How do you deal with that? And one of the things that I think when I got feedback on it was one of the good answers that I had was, well, Flash maybe is not necessarily the issue because Flash is a global summoner spell for anyone that knows League of Legends. Like, it affects everyone equally, and so it's probably more so that some of the champions or some of the items that go into the champions are making them individually a lot stronger. So maybe something about them at individual levels need to be changed, as opposed to Flash itself, which is a global thing. So if you change Flash, that would affect everybody, as opposed to if you change one specific character or one specific champion, it would only isolate them and fix their issues. So being able to have that understanding, that's, I think, what makes a systems designer.
I love that. Yeah, something I learned sort of embarrassingly recently was the difference between mechanics and systems. Your mechanic is a single input and reaction for the most part that a player is able to do, and your system is a combination of mechanics.
Yes.
Yeah. So when we say systems designer, we're basically saying the person that makes all the mechanics mesh together well in a fun and satisfying way. And that isn't too biased or whatever, or is biased, but we have an evolving
like
meta
textbook definition right there. I love it. Honestly,
nice,
very very good.
I'm getting better, I guess. One day I'll learn how to do good stuff. Awesome. Sweet. So yeah, let's get to community questions in just a moment, but I'd love like a little bit more of an exploration of that design interview process. How about this one? What are some of the ways that you prep for a design interview and you recommend others prep for a design interview?
Sure thing. I think the simplest and most effective thing you can do is absolutely, specifically if you're going to be working on like an existing game already that's out there, you have to play it and you have to know the ins and outs of it. Again, like in one of the Ubisoft talks, it was like, okay, you've never played any of our games, why are you even here? If you're going to be taking the reins of the series and you don't know anything about it, you don't even know how the core mechanics work, then you shouldn't even be in this call. So you should absolutely know the ins and outs of the game that you were going to be working on, because you're obviously going to be asked questions about it. Actually, that was a falter on me where it was a big blunder, and it was very tough for me to do an interview when I didn't know anything about the game. They asked very specific things, and I'm like, here's theoretically how I would do it. But again, it's like you need to put the time in, because then you can ace it. They obviously know about the game, and if you obviously know about the game, you can just essentially just have like a design chat with them. It can be a lot more casual because you're both very confident in what you're talking about. So know the games, and then also this I think bleeds a bit more over into an unreleased game. If you at least know the genre, play plenty in the genre. There was like a survival game that I talked to some people about, and when I was able to pull on my knowledge of other survival games I played, people were very receptive to that, of like, oh wow, like like what makes this part of the game good, what makes this, like the part of this other game, really good. We're pulling from all of these games in our design, so if you can do that as well, that speaks highly of you. So it's not my advice is not play more video games, because like, I mean, I wish that could be my advice, but 50 hours a week on Fortnite is not the same thing as, okay, I'm going to dissect Red Dead 2 and understand specifically what makes the narrative aspect fit well into the consumable systems. Like there's a lot that goes into playing games with a purpose. So play games with a purpose, specifically in the field that you're interviewing for.
Yeah, I think that's really solid advice. I think I would even expand that a little bit, or just say like anything you can do to better understand the game, the genre, and then potentially the direction that the game is going to head is all good. So one of the things that I've started doing when I really care about a job is I'll actually find real players if the game is live, and I'll interview them. I'll do basically just user interviews. And I'll try to discover some of the moments that matter to those players. I'll try to discover why they play. I try to figure out their user motivations. And then I summarize all of that. And this is like a little self-serving, but I make sure to mention that I interviewed some people during the interview, because it also shows, a little bit of extra effort.
Oh, absolutely.
And that just helps me, same thing, better have the conversation and better chat. Okay, last question before community questions is, what is some of the stuff that you found? You gave us some perspective into how valuable it is to get into design interviews, and you did tell us some of this already. But I'm curious, what are some of the tips to really just do the interview well? Like, I'm actually in the interview now. What do I need to be doing to make sure I nail this thing?
Keep it very, like conversational.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some of the things that I've had in the past is like very rigid of like I need to answer things, you know, one way or another. But you know, if they're trying to take it in like one specific direction, don't be too hesitant. And I think like again, like that's where the breadth of knowledge in whatever you are, you know, interviewing for is really going to be most effective. So if you know you're talking about like systems and you maybe have the most amount of expertise in one specific area of the game that they're trying to talk about, if they're trying to transition it somewhere else, if even if it's at like more of a surface level, if you're able to kind of go with that and like fluidly transition into other aspects, like the more that you can showcase that you have an understanding of how things work, the better. So yeah, keep it very conversational and don't feel too rigid, too tense in your answers. If the conversation specifically with the design lead, when they're kind of grilling you on design questions, if it can kind of feel almost like a design session, like if you were in the room, like if you had the job and you were with your lead designer and they were asking you questions on what you're going to do about the game and it's like a back and forth conversation, that's exactly how the interview should feel if you're to really like maximize it. Like that would be like optimal, and it would feel great for both you and the lead to know that you can mesh well together.
That's great. Yeah. Something that I think most people know, but worth mentioning is remember that almost all interviews, even the technical ones, are at least in part to understand cultural fit as well as technical fit or competence. So basically, people like to hire people that they like to hang out with, and that
Yeah.
makes sense. You're going to be spending 8 hours a day with this person, you know. So I love that as a piece of advice. Keep it casual, just enjoy it. Remember that all of these people are gamer dorks, just like you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even if they've been in the industry for years, they're still gamer dorks. John Romero is still a gamer dork. Still
Some of
probably
my
just
best
like
moments
talking about
in like
games.
interview, yeah, some of my best moments in interviews
Yeah,
are when could like just geek out about the game of like, oh my gosh, like you made this part of the game, like I love this part because you know when
yeah,
I play this character and like I like to spam this thing, and they're like, yeah, that's exactly how we intended you to play. Like if you
yeah.
can geek out with them, that's like a huge thing.
Yes,
So yeah, like don't be afraid to be nerdy with them because as you said, they're nerds too.
yeah. I just this wasn't a job interview, but I just had William Shen on the podcast, who's was design director on a bunch of Bethesda projects for a number of years. And I made the joke at him. Uh, did you write the line? Oh, you're finally awake, and he was like, "Yeah."
Oh,
And
that's so cool.
I geeked out so hard. I like
Yeah,
lost my train of
right?
thought. Oh my
Oh,
god.
that's
Yeah.
amazing.
All right. Anyway, let's get to some community questions. So the first one, it's I'm unsure if they want to come on stage, so I'm going to ask for them. ZXGN Jason asks, "How can we practice answering problem-solving design questions prior to the interview?"
Ooh, yeah. I think like some of the prep that I tend to do is to kind of like almost like you know take some of those questions that I mentioned earlier, like that they would probably ask you in relation to the game or you know the genre. Like if you're interviewing for a survival game, you
Mm-hmm.
know like pick a game in in the genre, you know, and then talk about you know what makes pick a game you know that you think is good, and then talk about what's good about it and what you can improve about it. You know, like do those exercises of like being a problem solver of how you can improve upon something. Like the more again like that you can talk about of how you're going to improve upon something or where things are lacking, and then again like improving the lacking things like that can go a long way. And again like there's potential to it's like you know there's potential you have like a tool belt essentially of like I can pull from this game, I can pull from this game, you know, or I can go like maybe you have one or two or just one and then you go real deep into those. Like it shows if you are very knowledgeable about a game in in the genre or like a couple at like a bit more of a surface level, but you can talk about them from a systems perspective. Like do that in your free time. That's what I like to do. Like I'm almost tempted to start like a YouTube channel of like game reviews because that's like essentially
Do
what a
it.
designer does of like you review games and see where they can improve. Like that's what reviewers I think would make great maybe I don't know, I could be wrong about this, but I think there's a lot of reviewers that could make great game designers because they know how, you know, like how to be a systems designer just based off a lot of the things they say.
Yeah.
So
I love that. That's it's something that is worth everybody hearing, even if you're not a designer or not interested in design. No matter what your discipline is, spending the effort to basically like case study how different games work in your discipline is hugely valuable. And then putting out content about that is also valuable. Building up a bit of a repertoire and building up a bit of a name that's what you do and that's what you know is really valuable. In and of itself, it's a practice exercise, and then potentially you're also building an audience and networking at the same time.
That was a big thing for me. I think, especially also for landing the message from the recruiter, was I was posting consistently about games I was working on and my design process behind them, and like things I would improve, things that fell short and whatnot, things that were good. I was doing that pretty often, and so I think that went a long way.
Yeah, I mentioned this before we started recording, but a lot of the time, what people care about when you're in an interview, when you're doing technical design interviews, is process more than solution. Like they want to hear that you've got a good solution, but they want to hear more so, especially when you're not like lead level or senior level. They want to hear more so that you've got a good process, that you're thinking through things in an adequate way, and that you're like coachable, malleable. They want to hear that you've got a good head on your shoulders, kind of. So yeah, if you're explaining process, that's extremely valuable. It doesn't need to be right, or at least doesn't need to be perfect.
I think that's important. Is they're not looking for the right answer to any of those questions of like, how would you improve upon X, Y, and Z. It's how did you get to your proposed solution? Like, how did you work there?
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I would actually, for the design questions themselves, that feels like a fantastic resource for us to put together, like a couple of practice design questions. We've got at least 2 for you to practice, and that is you've got a minute to explain a 52 card game. What do you do? And what's your favorite game of all time? Defend it. And now what would you change about it? Maybe we'll put together some more for y'all. All right. Next question for you from Mako, who doesn't have a mic. So I'm going to read this one as well. Mako asks, what tools do you use as a systems designer? Should they be practicing? What should they be using?
Yes. This is actually the thing as well that I think is like super important, that is like not talked about at all. Is spreadsheets. Is if you can get really good with like Excel or Google Sheets specifically. Like we use Google Sheets, and I touch them probably about 60 to 80% of my time at work. It's something that is like nobody even knows about for some crazy reason, but they're so important. Because that's where all of your balancing, that's where like all of your data input is going to be. Like any numerical value for anything is essentially like in a large spreadsheet for all games, like RPGs. Like if you're looking at your health stats, if you're looking at your attack stats, there's for enemies, for yourself, like there's a giant list, and it's all like there's hundreds and thousands. I actually recently found out what the Google Sheets 5 million cell limit is, because I accidentally hit it. So you need to, like that will make you really stand out from the crowd, is if you have a good understanding of how to use spreadsheets, because that's how you're going to do a lot of your balancing and a lot of your designs. So, but it's not talked about enough, which is so crazy to me. I didn't even know that was like a thing, like until I graduated and I started my job, is that like all my day is going to be spent in spreadsheets. So if you can learn more about spreadsheets and specifically how they work in games, there's a great book. It's one of my favorite books. I have it by me at all times. It's Intro to Game Systems Design by Dax Gazaway. He's worked on a lot of like Star Wars games, for example. But I can like link it or something. But this is one of my favorite systems design books. So if you want to go deeper, and he even talks a lot about spreadsheets and how they work in games specifically. Really great book. Would highly recommend. But spreadsheets is a great way to make yourself stand out, technical wise.
I love that. Yeah. And you could use spreadsheets for like so much more than you think. Like I've definitely never personally made a spreadsheet with 5 million cells. That's insane, Luke.
It was accidental, I'll be honest. Like I was like, what if I just copy and pasted all of these lines of for our new event that's coming out? Oh, okay, wow. That's accidentally 5 million. Okay, sorry.
That's craziness. But I'll even use spreadsheets just for like organizing. Like I did a gardening system recently, and I had to organize like which order the player was unlocking the plants that they could plant and the different attributes of each of the plants. And that was an Excel spreadsheet with a total of like, I don't know, 200 cells. Pretty small thing. So it doesn't need to be crazy. Start small.
Oh yeah, that can be super. It can be super small. It can be like 10 cells. Like it still can get a lot done. But yeah, it's so important.
So important. Awesome. All right. Next, we're gonna have Darth. How do I say this? Darth BKQ. who has not responded. So I'll ask this one too. I'm speaking a lot today. The question is simple. What are your tips for articulating your design solutions clearly during an interview?
Oh man, that's a really good question. Tips for
Oh, it's Bonner. Hi,
articulating.
Bonner. Sorry,
So,
personal.
could you repeat it one more time? I just want to make sure I'm getting it right.
Yeah. So, what are your tips for articulating a design during the interview? Adequately describing, adequately explaining.
Sure. I think like you want to make sure you're not tripping over yourself. Don't talk too fast. Take pauses. Because I think you want to gauge if the person that is interviewing you is kind of like following along. I've even had times where I've been like, does this make sense so far? Like, are we moving in the right direction? And I think those give like great, really small but quick bits of feedback of like, oh well, I'm actually more so looking for, this part of like maybe less of a theoretical, more of a technical way to like solve this. And I think that's like totally fine. There's nothing wrong with asking questions. And if anything, that's what you're going to be doing in your day to day. When business development comes to me and says, we need, here's our metrics we're trying to hit. So can you make something that's like this? And then I'll go back and ask more questions to be more specific of like, what direction should I be taking our designs in based on that? You're going to be doing that at work. And so ask questions, make sure you're moving in the right direction. Don't trip over yourself. Don't be talking too fast. You want to make sure that people are able to follow you with kind of what you're saying. And I think just like articulating again, like just be able to know what you're talking about and don't make things up. Again, like I feel like I was almost like teetering on that line of making things up at one point during an interview because I just didn't know enough about the game. I was just being very like theoretical with a general understanding of their systems for the game. And so the more you know, the easier it is for you to articulate.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I think, as with anything, remember that it's just practice. The more hours you spend doing basically anything, you get better at.
Yep.
And so you can practice in a lot of different situations. You can practice with friends. You can talk through the design of whatever with buddies. Come to the Indie Game Academy Discord. We can have conversations in here. The more you practice articulating design thoughts, the better you're going to get at doing it. Also, another great reason to publicize some of your own thoughts on games, because that's another chance for you to practice, intelligently talking through how a system works.
I think if you're also like making games, like that's a great way to find out if you're articulating your designs properly. If you're a designer, if you go to your engineers and say, "Hey, I want this feature," and if they make it properly, then good job. They have a good understanding of what you were, articulating. But if they don't make it properly, it's not necessarily their fault. And in most cases, it's not their fault. They're going off of exactly what you told them. And if what you had in your mind is different than what they created, that's how you know if things aren't lining up.
Which happens so much.
Yes. It happens to me all the time. We've had plenty of meetings at work where it's like, why is this work like this? This is not what I wanted at all. And it's like, well, this is what you said it should be. And I'm like, that's not what I meant. Like even minor misunderstandings of words can lead to like ripple effects. So you really want to make sure your terminology is also like very important to have defined. Lots of horror stories with that.
It's part of the reason to learn jargon, actually. Like, you think for a while that jargon is bad, but once you get, I think, a little bit more into it, jargon is actually good because it's harder to misinterpret as long as they know what the word means. But yeah, it's a great point. All right, we're going to do our last question of the day. We're coming to the end of our time. So I'm going to bring Haley up to ask the question, but I kind of want to stack a little bit more on top of your question, Haley. So Zachary from LinkedIn asks, could you folks speak a little bit on getting to the interview? I'm pretty comfortable interviewing, but just landing that interview has been such a problem for me. And Haley's question is similar to that. So Haley, I'm going to have you come up and ask yours, but if you'll think about just like actually landing an interview, Luke, love to hear some thoughts.
Hi, hello.
Hi. Hello.
Are you going to Indie Revolution bomb us, or?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Here's my question. I basically wrote like, with how our industry views entry level, like what would you recommend that newcomers do when it comes to getting their portfolios out there and to land the job, essentially? Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so the main focus is getting that first interview, and I think like one of the best things that you can do is be very active on like LinkedIn. I'm a huge like LinkedIn guy. I'm not as great as you, Haley. Haley, you're killer with that. I admire you a lot, actually. I'm like, dang, I gotta get on that level. But
Are we
yeah, like be
connected?
very, yeah, we are. Yes, trust me. I see your posts. Yes,
Oh
but
my god.
we can talk more later. But yeah, like the more that you can put your thoughts out there, again, like of your design critiques, and your thought process, like that's what I mentor people. I basically say, whenever you're working on a project, put as many, put your like, do blogs about what you're creating and what you're designing, and put that on LinkedIn on a consistent like basis. Like once a week, make a blog post of what you worked on and why specifically, and get a ton of connections. That is exactly how I got my interview. Is I was posting consistently on what I was working on, and here was my thought process behind my designs for this update I had this week. And then I connected with a bunch of relevant people that I thought if they saw this, maybe they would be like, oh, let's give this guy a shot. So yes, make stuff
You were
and
right.
have a good understanding of why you are doing what you're doing. Make posts about it, and then connect with the right people.
That's awesome. Does that answer your question, Haley?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Nice. Yeah,
Of course.
fantastic. As always, keep working on games as well, and actually launch games, actually release games.
Yes.
And they don't need to be huge. I often recommend that people don't time box for longer than like 2 months at first. You can make a satisfying, tiny little experience in 2 months that proves some cool design principles and still get a bunch of experience, especially if you're working on a team. Another thing I recommend. All right, we're definitely at time. This has been a really great chat, Luke. Thank you for coming on. Before we say goodbye, we love to do homework on this show. So, yes. What is something that the audience can do in the next week? It'll take about an hour to practice some of what you've told us here today.
Sure thing. Yeah, I actually wrote my answer down. I knew this question was kind of coming. And so this is entirely based off of a real world example that I was given for a test. And this is super important if you can nail this. So I wrote, in 300 words or less, write about a well-designed game you've played, or better yet, even a game that you are making or have made yourself. Outline which features or mechanics that work well, what makes it stand out in comparison to other games in the genre, and then like what ways you can improve upon it. And then optional, but highly valuable, as I mentioned, is make a post about it on LinkedIn. Nice. I think it's very important to get those. It's great to do these exercises, but if you can put them out there for other people to see and be like, hey, that's really insightful. I want to talk to this person more. There is potential for that. So yeah.
Nice. I'm gonna push for it, as I always do. So the homework is in 300 words or less. You hold on here. I forget. In 300 words or less, you write down information about a well-designed game or your own game and what works about that system. Is that correct?
Yeah, and if you can also mention like what about the systems in it makes it stand out in relation to other games. Yes. That way you can pull upon other games that you have knowledge on in the genre. Yeah.
Awesome. That's perfect. Yeah, specifically in the genre. So so write 300 words or less about a well-designed system in a game that you love or that you're making right now. And then specifically what helps it stand out from other games in the genre, 300 words or less. And absolutely, I'm going to push for it. Luke is being nice, but post that to LinkedIn. And then tag Luke Piazza and tag.
I was gonna say tag me. Yes, I will. I would love to engage with this. Like this is my favorite thing to do is talk about design. So I would love to hear everybody's thoughts and maybe I'll give my own on what you're writing. So
heck yeah. And if that makes you too uncomfortable, I really encourage you to just do it. But if that makes you too uncomfortable, you can post it to our Discord instead. All right. That is going to do it for the episode. It has been a fantastic episode. Luke, is there any last messages you want to give to the audience or anything you want to plug here at the very end?
I just want to say, this is, I really do admire this group. This is such an amazing opportunity that I think you have all kind of like collectively put together. I'm still in awe at all the things you guys do. And I've been lurking in the background for a while, seeing all the amazing work that everyone's been collectively putting together. So bravo, kudos to all of you. You're doing great. And maybe someday we'll all work together. So that would be #Indie Revolution, as Haley puts it, So
heck yeah. I love that. Yeah, that should be your aspiration. Land a job with Luke Piazza. That's your new goal, everybody.
please aspire higher than that.
All right. It has been a fantastic episode. Thank you, everybody, for listening. As always, we ask that you send us along to just one other person who may learn something from this episode. That helps us out a ton. But otherwise, we'll be back here Wednesday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Links to join us down below. Luke, thank you so much for being here and answering all these questions. This has been a great episode.
Thank you all so much. This has been awesome. Really appreciate it.
Heck yeah. All right. Goodbye, everybody. Take care. Have a wonderful day.